Welcome to the Reflect On podcast, where we embark on inspiring conversations filled with truth, vulnerability, and, well, anything else that'll help us learn, grow, and live better lives. I'm your host, Kevin P. Murphy. Thank you so much for embarking on this reflection journey with me today. Now let's get right into it. This episode is with Jonathan Viscosi. John is a professional football or soccer player that has lived his childhood dreams in ways he never actually envisioned. From playing locally in Ontario to representing his country during his collegiate years to playing in Europe professionally and obtaining a master's degree in emotional psychology, John's journey possesses a myriad of learnings that go beyond the academic and the athletic realms. And yet, some of his biggest successes were those when there were no trophy or no external glory involved whatsoever. John reflects on the most rewarding parts of his professional career before sharing how one of his most impactful moments came at a peak when nothing went according to plan. He then contrasts identity versus outcomes and what the best solution may be to separate the two for optimal performance. We dive deeper into some of John's academic research on how high performance can be achieved through self-regulation and the multi-states theory. And as the reflections continue, he shares how it's more than just simple self-talk, in addition to some really impactful tactics that allow one to achieve their best performance in sports and in life. This is a powerful, vulnerable, scientific, academic, and wonderful episode. Thank you, as always, for spending time with us today, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Mr. Jonathan Viscosi. All right, Jonathan Viscosi, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time. Sincerely, I'm excited for this. You are someone who's been an elite performer in many ways. I'm excited to see how your brain works, how it has worked since I've last spoken to you in person, which has been a long time. So I wanted to start with something, you've had a wonderful professional career and you've been playing high level sports in a degree since you were really young, for decades at this point now. And I wanted to start, you've been professional at one form or another in football. Apologies in advance for the North Americans, but we're going to call it football for the sake of this episode. Perfect. But for your football career, you have been at an elite level in some way, shape, or form for a long time. When you look back all the way from your childhood to even now, what are some of the most rewarding memories you have from your professional career and why?
Yeah, no, there's been, like you said, for me, it all blends together because from a young age, I was very clear on what I wanted to do. And it was one of the main reasons why I was playing the sport was to try and be the best I can be and play at a professional level. I was fascinated with performing in front of an audience and playing in a stadium, an arena, and kind of going after, like a difficult feat and trying to achieve something meaningful with the group of guys that, are on your team in a team sport. So it was always kind of clear to me that I wanted to play at a high level. So even from a young age, I was taking it just as that. Like nothing has really changed in terms of me progressing from youth football to being an older age in university and then professionals, always treating it as a professional. Of course, I learned more along the way and my process kind of developed and evolved, and it's definitely more methodical now and more structured than it used to be. So with that, I would say that the most memorable moments and the ones that stand out the most are I would say the periods where I really prepared for something. So for example, when I was younger, it could have been a tournament, or as I got older, it started to be these types of combines or showcase tournaments where I knew there was going to be scouts watching from university or professional settings, and I was going to kind of make an account of the goalkeeper that I am and show what I can do. Whenever I got those moments right, where there was kind of a long build up and I was preparing for it and training and kind of went through the whole process and then did it and then look back, evaluated, and I can really be proud of my performances and know that I gave the best account of myself. It didn't really matter whether we won the tournament, whether we won the game, or if I got the result I was looking for. I was always like happy with those moments and satisfied because I knew I did everything I could. And if it wasn't going to be this one, it was going to be the next one. Like there was always kind of a calmness with that. And then at the same time, I would say the biggest disappointments were the times where I knew I wasn't fully at it. It wasn't in my position. It's hard to say like I didn't give it all I had because effort is exerted in a different manner than it is for like a field player as a goalkeeper. But it's more of the mental state that I'm in. It was I fully committed? Was I fully ready? Was I fully prepared? And the times where I didn't get the outcome that I wanted, and I sensed that that was missing, those were like the hardest moments to accept. So the old expression that it kind of comes down to you and it's you against you and this and that, it really does hold true because I would say my proudest moments and my most disappointing moments kind of lie on either side of that in terms of was I in the right state to kind of make the best account of who I am.
That's incredible. I mean, what I was thinking about when I hear you say that was really your being your authentic self in whatever the evolution of that is, right? It's not as if you're this stagnant individual all along the course of your professional career as well, but only you knew the answer along the way of whether or not you were going to be in those moments of actually top pursuance of something. Whether or not, to your point, the outcome was a win or loss, which is something I definitely want to talk about in a bit. But it's really interesting that in this world of where we think we need to win, 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 so to speak, and in a professional one, it almost seems like you're able to somehow detach your identity as well from it in a sense. Is that fair to say? And if you could, in terms of being a professional football player, football or soccer player, how did you associate your identity with that? How do you do that today? How has that journey been?
Yeah, no, it's identity is a really important component for me. It's something that became clearer as I went on, but then it kind of relates back to who I was when I was very young and kind of had this dream of being a professional football player and going through kind of those processes that I was explaining, you know. It ties to that. You kind of it's easier to look back and recognize traits that were present when you didn't like you weren't aware of them to then as you get older and maybe you try and replicate your game and these processes to somebody that you look up to and you're trying to be so there's multiple components that kind of go into forming identity and then when you really become more thoughtful about it and you really kind of start to conceptualize it that's where I think it holds a lot of power and that's a process I've and a journey that I've gone on and I take very seriously and now the motivation before every game and every kind of performance situation is like I said it before to make you know a fair account of who I am. That's really the determinant. That's more important than the outcome because every time I have the opportunity, I try and show, you know, the goalkeeper that I am, and that's my identity as a goalkeeper. In terms of identity as a bigger, you know, picture and more kind of holistic approach, it's I'm much more than just a goalkeeper. But when I'm performing, that's kind of the identity that I'm trying to fulfill. And then, of course, there's, you know, fulfillment comes when you act in accordance with that identity. Um, so yeah, but just to kind of touch back on you said what you know what are the most memorable moments and I'm thinking of kind of before you're aware of a lot of the things that we're discussing and one actually so you know just for the listeners our relationship goes back to me and your brother being you know best friends so we're very close and one of my a lot of good memories kind of happened with Robbie on the field actually and one specifically was and I know he'll like this one is an Ontario Cup semifinal against Brampton East where we had a good rivalry with them. We were both playing for Ottawa South United at the time, under 17s, and they were definitely the toughest opponent in the league. And we already played them once in the league, and now we had them in the cup for the second time away, and it was a semifinal. And to us, we really treated that as the final because, funny enough, we ended up losing the final to a team that was, you know, much inferior than Brampton East was but we were working together that summer. We were training a lot, you know, in that we were working doing summer camps. So a lot of the times on the field, we'd allocate some training as well. We used to drive to the trainings together, and there was at the time this energy drink called Frank's Energy Drink, right? It wasn't Red Bull. I don't know what stood out to me about that and to Robbie as well, but we used to always pick one up along the way and kind of get really energized and get a little hyped up listening to some music on the way to training and then have a really good training and then we'd be discussing it on the way back and preparing for this game that we knew that was coming. We both knew like we would have to step up and I had a really good game making many key saves and Robbie had a huge impact on the field and he definitely scored. It could have been more than one goal. I don't remember the score, but we ended up going to penalties. And I remember saving a penalty, having to take a penalty and scoring it. And yeah, probably also scored his penalty. And I remember once we won the penalty shootout, we kind of had a big dog pile and we were celebrating. And after me and him had a moment where it tied back to before the game, where we both kind of, before the game started, like I said, mentioned to each other, me and you today have to have a really big game, and let's grab hold of this opportunity. And then afterwards, kind of embracing each other and recognizing that we did it together, as well as with all our other teammates, but especially me and him, because we spent so much time training together and preparing for these big moments. And we knew we were having bigger plans and dreams at the time that much bigger moments were going to come. But that was a significant one along the journey to that. That's one that, as I reflect back, and I didn't know you were going to ask me that question, stands out, and I haven't revisited that memory in a long time. But yeah, it just kind of came back to me.
That's special, man. And while you were telling that story, it reminded me that, again, the outcome, we're probably going to say that word a lot today, but it's almost like you could have lost that game. And yes, you were dogpiling in a celebration. Obviously, you moved toward the final, but the outcome of it, regardless, in the everlasting sense of identity formation, evolution as a human being, who you are, the maturity you gain, the self awareness you gain, was from the outcomes of the friendships formed in the trenches of a team
Definitely,
sport, or
definitely,
the
yeah,
training, or failing together, or learning to be vulnerable in places like
100%.
that and show who you
Yeah.
were.
Definitely. And in that setting, and I would say also in playing in university as well, it was so much more pure than it is as a professional, because as a professional player, as much as there's a team and unified kind of identity and team culture, really, your self-interest is always kind of at play in terms of it's your livelihood, right? So you're always thinking about how you're going to progress. And it's very rare that you can have a full professional career with the same team and the same group of guys. So I've had so many teammates, and I played for many different teams throughout my journey as a professional. But growing up, playing for the same club year after year with the same guys that you were friends with, from a young age, and you first started playing together, and the same in university. Yeah, those were really special bonds. And to do it, that's what I was saying at the beginning, to do kind of special things and take on difficult tasks with that group that you associate so deeply with. Those are truly special and memorable moments that you cherish. And it's something that the game, that's one of the most beautiful things the game offers you.
Very well said. So, John, the wonderful thing about you being, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've been journaling in some form or another since you were 18, 20 years old.
Yeah, we have that in common, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. The wonderful thing about that, and for those who don't know, you do have published some work beyond that in terms of your thoughts and made them public in I think an amazing way. The wonderful thing rather about that for me is that I get to use it against you and challenge you with questions. So I'm going to do that because you mentioned something right now about following your dreams
Yes.
when you were younger. Okay,
Yeah.
and I want to understand where your mind is at in that now. So this is directly from you and something you've posted in 2016. I am not yet where I want to be able to say I have fulfilled my dream and you can too, but it's never too early to start something you're passionate about. And if my blog post touches even one person, I will see this as a successful project. Do you think you're in a place now where you fulfilled your dreams?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. It's probably not exactly how I dreamt of it at the time, even well before I wrote that blog post. But yeah, that was kind of right at the beginning. And 8 years since then?
Mm.
So not that long in the grand scheme of things, but in terms of a professional career, many people are fortunate if they have 8 years in the professional game. So for sure, no, this actually, it was last year where I was having a little bit of a more difficult season, where I picked up an injury and we were in a tough team situation. And I kind of, from the beginning, I got married at the beginning of that year, and I knew that was gonna be my last year in Europe. It was kind of decided in terms of not just for myself, but my wife also. We had plans on settling in Canada, and she was going through the permanent residency process and everything. So we needed an extra year in Europe. I was also finishing my master's at the time, but we knew that the following year, this year, would be coming to Canada.
Mm.
So I really had this vision of and the team that I kind of chose, the opportunity I chose to have as my last year in Europe. I had this grand vision of it being such a glorious year, and I really finish on a high and have an amazing experience and kind of like a capstone to what was, yeah, a 10-year journey in Europe, from arriving in 2013 and finishing in 2023. And it seemed like everything but that. And when I was really in the thick of it, when I just got injured, I just got myself in the starting 11 and I was playing, and then I got injured, and an injury that I suffered from at the beginning of my career, and it was something that kind of, it's been a challenge I've had to manage the whole time. And then getting injured like that in a game against a team that I had such an amazing memory, like playing in that exact stadium against that team 5, 6 years ago before. It was very interesting to have that happen there. Anyways, and then in terms of trying to make meaning of it and reflect on it, speaking to a mentor, and I was really discouraged, and he was the one who kind of helped me look back and say, people always say you shouldn't look back, and it's better to always kind of look forward. But in certain moments, it is important to kind of look back and recognize, how far you've come, and not just that, but everything, rather than looking for what more there is to gain from a pursuit or journey, looking back and recognizing everything that is given you. And
Mm.
coming back to identity and just the fullness of an experience, it was way more than just football and accolades and recognition and earnings, these type of things, these material type things that it gave me so much more than that. And it was such a rich and full experience. And it was important that time, rather than trying to think of how to have this grand finale that I can, be so proud of and bring closure to and share the story of everyone. It was kind of like a little bit of a shakeup to say, look back and recognize everything that it's given you and what it's still giving you in terms of learnings, and the learnings that have come through the challenges and adversity that I've overcome. And that kind of helped me recognize in terms of my identity, going back way, like all the way to being, a child, really 8, 10 years old, and recognizing kind of who were the characters, who were the people that I looked up to. And it wasn't like the perfectly polished figures that were like, for example, the now people would recognize Messi and Ronaldo in football as like the Neymar, like the most, the highest level players. Those weren't the players that I looked up to. I grew up in Canada, in Ottawa. We grew up in the same area, right? We looked up to people who rolled their sleeves up and got to work and were gritty and were tough and overcame adversity. And another post that I had on my blog that ties to kind of dreams and everything was, I was fascinated with all like the sports movies, like the inspirational movies. I call them the Disney movies because many of them were, that kind of go through these stories where individuals, teams overcome such difficult odds and then achieve something incredible at the end of it. And it's an amazing feat, and they're celebrated. And it looks like it was like these moments you think that life can come to an end after that and you'd be at peace. So going through the journey, one, you realize it's not a Disney movie. These kind of, I don't want to say happy endings because I don't want to be pessimistic, but in terms of things always coming full circle and finishing in a positive outcome happen, but not always the way that you imagine. And they can come in many different forms. And there's many different ways to achieve a goal or to take kind of fulfillment from achieving something spectacular. And it's not always in terms of finishing with your hands up and being celebrated for it. It can come in much more different and introspective ways that you recognize it and that you feel satisfied with it. And in that moment, that was one of those moments to look back and recognize, wow, this journey's given me so much. And even when I came here to take on this challenge in the top league in Finland, where I've had previous success, and I thought it was a good opportunity for me to go and finish in a top league in Europe and show kind of the improvements I made over the 5 years from when I previously played there. And it wasn't going that way, but then it caused me to look in, and then I was able to see it from a different angle and recognize that actually it's given me, such a unique opportunity in terms I was finishing my master's at the same time, and I was writing my thesis. And another mentor kind of helped me recognize, isn't this sort of like, what is the point of a thesis? The point of a thesis is kind of a capstone of your whole kind of educational journey in a specific subject that you're becoming a master in. and the thesis is showing that you have a clear understanding of the full theoretical backgrounds and that you can apply it towards something and scientifically research it and test it and then discuss it and show that you have a really sound conceptual understanding of it, right? And he goes, isn't this what this year has given you? It's basically every single challenge you face at different points in your career. You're experiencing it all in this one last year that you were expecting it to go great and it's not. Isn't this an opportunity to really show who you are in terms of your identity and overcome these challenges that you've overcome them before, but now you're having to overcome them all, at the same time and in a more grand manner and under a bigger kind of microscope in terms of the level you're at and the implications that it has. And that was really kind of the driving force that drove me to kind of change my perspective and really approach that situation that didn't change for me. I never found my way back in to the team playing wise, but I took on a role that really existed in me and was something, basically I decided that I'm going to be the number one, like the same person that I am without being the number one, right? There was another keeper that was playing ahead of me. I was coming back from injury, but I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to give what I give to the team in the same manner as long as I can, without actually being on the field. And then on top of that, I'm doing my master's to become a sports psychologist and a high performance coach, right? So why don't I take on that role now in a team that really needed it? We were in a really tough position. We were last place after 12 games and facing, relegation, which is, has really heavy implications in Europe. And yeah, I just decided, okay, I'm going to find another way to contribute while I'm injured and while I'm getting myself back. I'm still going to be around the guys. I'm going to help them individually. I'm going to help the coach in terms of he's running out of things to say to the team and how he can help, and keep them motivated in a time where everybody's very discouraged and down and kind of, yeah, just as I got back on the field, just be fully part of that process and use kind of the theories and things that I was working with on my thesis on this actual live practical experience with this team. And it became one of the most amazing years of my career where I wasn't playing, but we went from last place to third place, being unbeaten for 17 games. We won 16 out of those 17 games. We won 12 in a row. So we drew on the 13th game and then we won the following 5 games, I think it was, to finish third and win a bronze medal and qualify for Europa Conference League. And at the end, really feeling like, yeah, I didn't play, but I was a big part of the process. And I got the recognition, not by the outside, but by my actual teammates and the coaches and the people in the organization. And that, yeah, meant in a way, of course, outside recognition is nice, but that almost meant more to me in terms of hearing it from them and reinforce kind of what I believe my true calling is in terms of my next career as a sports psychologist. Just like when I was writing that blog post and I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be sharing those things, I kind of did it as a pilot project in a way. And that was also in the same way, something similar to that. And yeah, we kind of got off the original question, but I think that ties to it.
That's totally okay. There's so many golden nuggets in that story. One of the ones that was on the later part of it was it's almost as if that injury had to happen. I think about professional athletes, and I know people personally, and I know people from engaging and hearing their stories, even at people that we would all know. I know that there's a big cliff drop off there, right? When you, speaking of identity, when you unconsciously wrap your identity so much in these outcomes potentially, or in this sport, or in this part of your life, and you train and you put so much effort into it, the falling off of a cliff, if you have to do a shift in regards to really changing and evolving who you are, either forcefully, physically in the sport world, or just otherwise, if it's a business or a relationship or anything else, sometimes your hands are just forced. And it's almost as if that injury was a blessing in disguise for you to be able to have that conversation with your mentor, to be able to have that introspection, to be able to actually make yours a career, holistically career of what you're doing for your livelihood in a beautiful way, was one where it was the start of a runway for you, where you took off in another manner, rather than just being an athlete, having your identity wrapped up with that, and then letting the recency bias of your final game that wasn't one that you wanted in that realm be one that just defined your whole career or that outcome of who you were as a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on, really. And as you're saying that, I can't help but think of, you say it was kind of meant to happen, or there was definitely like it needed to happen, is what you said. And you said, how'd you refer to it, like a cliff, like falling off a cliff in a way?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was inevitable because I was, I like I said, I wrapped so much meaning around this grand finale, right? Which was tied to identity and kind of fantasizing very about outcomes and results, and anytime there's the word meaning, there's heavy emotions that are tied to it. And emotions can, are so powerful that they can overtake you. And the irony is my master's degree that I was doing was in emotion psychology. So it's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I was studying. So you're right. And that's kind of what my mentor Keith helped me recognize was just how rewarding and how giving the journey is, in a way that you kind of you get exactly what you ask for. It just doesn't always present itself in the manner that you're expecting or would like it to be. And that's why perspective is so important, and being able to recapture it. And then my other mentor, Mark, he's so good at and he's really taught me a lot about how to work with identity. And when I say mentors, these are actual sports psychologists and mental performance coaches that I've
Mm-hmm.
worked with personally, but were also mentoring me to work in the field. And yeah, it really was exactly like you said, a runway to kind of see exactly, the how I want to work and how I can bring kind of my attributes and my approach and my experiences to this theoretical structures of how to work with athletes and help them through psychological barriers, and to kind of maximize potential and opportunities. It for sure brought a lot of clarity to that. And it really did, as it was like I wrote just for myself kind of a preface to my thesis, which was on the emotion performance relationship, in terms of how what I was writing about was exactly what I was experiencing. And it wasn't just in my own performance, but also how it was helping the guys, and that this process that kind of developed with the coach and the players. And it was sometimes I felt like, am I overstepping? Because I wasn't a member of staff, and you always have to be careful when you're a player not to cross that line in terms of losing the relatableness to the players, in terms of them thinking, is this guy, does he think he's one of the coaches?
Mm-hmm.
But I was an older player in the team. The coaches kind of knew that I got very unlucky and I had so much to give. And unfortunately, because of the circumstances, I wasn't able to give, exactly what I was brought in to do for, but they knew that this was another side that was going to be a bonus for them. But it turned out to be kind of, the bulk of my contribution really to that club was on the side of things that they thought was going to be a bonus, in terms of being a leader, and not on the field but actually from the side, and helping to get the best out of the players and form this kind of collective mentality that became so powerful for us and helped everybody to kind of plug into it, and we gained momentum through it. And it was just this incredible process that's still running, and the team's doing great. They've had a great start to this year, and still in touch with some of the players that are still there, and even some of the players that have gone into other clubs. And everybody was affected positively from that. And this wasn't just all coming from me. I was just one component of it. But back to what I was saying, we finished third. We didn't finish first. We got a bronze medal. The funny thing was, I was on a bachelor party with a player on the team that got the silver medal, and they were tied for points with the team that finished first, but they had a worse goal differential. And he said, it's hilarious, like the team that finished first and us who finished second, who should really be recognized, because we tied the team that finished first that everybody expected to win. We weren't expected to win, but nobody's talking about us because they're all talking about you guys, and you guys won a bronze medal and celebrated it and got recognized like you guys won the whole league, because it was that much of a feat. And that just goes to
Wow.
show that it's not really the outcome specifically. It's the journey that you go on, and the obstacles you're able to overcome, and the growth and how you kind of apply the learnings. And that's really the title of my thesis was, it's a must win. And that's where I love that. That was a phrase that came up in that season in a game where we did have to win. You hear it, now with the hockey playoffs and the NBA, the game sevens, the game sixes, where the teams their seasons are on the line, and you hear it's a must win, this kind of concept, and it really causes you to tighten up. And I've experienced that year after year whenever I've heard that. And I learned that, well, actually, seeing it from a different angle and perspective, the must win really lies in terms of applying the learnings that you've gained, the preparation that you've undertaken, and the experience that's come through all of that to this current situation that you're in. And doing that to the best of your abilities, just the way I described it when I was young, in terms of making the best account of who I am, doing that from as a team perspective, those are the most rewarding moments in sports.
Beautiful. And let's talk about it's a must win, your thesis and everything and what you've studied even from the academic side as well, because as you've displayed, John, it's a lot of thresholds that they cross in a beautiful way. A lot of ways it obviously applies to life outside of sports too. But as I understand, which is certainly an immature level, but the must comes from the must theory or the multi-state theory. And when I was learning more about that, what I saw a lot of is this notion of self-talk and
Yes.
how important the self-talk is to oneself in high performance of elite athletes as you studied, but also just high performance of life as well. Take me through,
Just to add to that,
yeah, please.
just to bring it back to, it's a very complex theory and great, recognition. I'm glad that you looked it up and read about it and picked up on that, the kind of the play on words in the title, using that acronym. It's actually self-regulation. So it's a self-regulation process, and self-talk is a part of the self-regulation process. But
Okay.
self-regulation is absolutely essential, not just for elite performers, but for everybody in everyday life, and just anyone who's high performers, high achievers, even just regular normal individuals going about their daily life. Self-regulation is a continual process, and the degree in which you can do that, is going to be very determinant of how well you're able to perform in all different walks of life. And self-talk is a form of self-regulation.
You know what I love about that is that I actually, even before I jumped into your thesis and everything, is that I don't have I wouldn't say it's a beef with it or anything. I actually just have a different way of looking at it in terms of self-talk. I understand it's a way of us identifying what it is, but when we think of self-talk, I actually like the form more of dialogue or what you said, regulation, instead of the
Yeah.
word talk. Because talk only ensues that you're basically the only one talking with yourself and you're never listening to yourself. You're never actually listening and reflecting
Yes.
on the signals. And when you say
Right.
self-regulation, that's where I feel, and I want to hear your thoughts in the scientific realm of this as well, and what you've studied with the multi-state theory and everything in a moment. But that's just what comes to my amateur mind, in the sense of self-talk is when we talk to someone, it's only a one-way street, right? If we were talking like you and I are, the beauty of this conversation is that we both input into it, whether it's questions, reflections, or otherwise. But if it's only one of us talking necessarily, there's not really as much enrichment that we could maybe gain from both of us being in a room, right? So if you're with yourself, whether that's physically or otherwise, I think of more a self dialogue or self regulation, as you say it, in the more scientific realm of it's a myriad of things. It's not simply just how you talk to oneself. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, no, you're first of all, you don't have to label yourself as an amateur. You've got a very good understanding of everything that this podcast is actually about. So it's far from amateur. And self-talk is just a label. It's a mental skill that falls under the self-regulation category, right? And self-regulation goes far beyond sports. It's a psychological process that is continuously ongoing, in terms of, if you think of your body just kind of consistently achieving homeostasis in terms of the regulation processes biologically. Psychologically, we also have these processes, and that's emotions really is a big component of that, in terms of regulating your affective state, right? Emotions elicit based off of a reaction to a situation, and those emotions are trying to serve you in a functional manner, based off of our, evolutionary makeup, right? Which in nowadays doesn't always serve us in a functional manner. It can be dysfunctional. And that's where the field of psychology and and sports psychology has come from, and why it's so important to regulate emotions and have an understanding of them so that they can start to serve you in a functional manner rather than a dysfunctional manner. So you're right. And self-talk is a mental skill, probably like one of the I remember the first book I read on sports psychology, I was 15 years old, and there was just something weird in terms of like why was this game I was able to perform so well and be so good, but then now this game I was so poor and didn't do well at all. Like what's going on? Why does it change? Like I'm not, my energy levels are the same, my output's the same.
Mm,
And it just made sense to me that, it's okay. I was 15 years old. I didn't quite understand it, but it's got to be something in the mind. Now I understand, that the label can be psychological barriers. There's a lot of psychological barriers from the internal self that come up, and we often prepare for the challenges from the external environment in terms of the opponent, the conditions of the field, the weather, all these things when we're preparing for sports, but we often neglect the internal, mental and emotional obstacles. I like to call psychological barriers. So picking up that book, I remember self-talk, visualization. These are mental skills that are very important and served many athletes, and they can actually be worked on. So I thought of self-talk exactly as you were explaining it, and then once you recognize like what's actually going, like you said, when you actually listen to yourself in moments that you're not performing so well, that's where you recognize kind of the dysfunctional side of self-talk and the ongoing thought process that's going on, and you're hearing about it, and maybe you're not paying direct attention to it, but it's having an effect on your feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, right? Now for the thesis, actually diving into the literature on self-talk and understanding it, that process that we're talking about is called organic self-talk. So it's this natural ongoing conversation that you're consistently having with yourself. It's the voice in your own head. And it's basically a reflection of the thoughts that you're having by the thinking mind. It's also called spontaneous self-talk. It's happening uncontrollably, right? It's uncontrollable, continuous dialogue, and it's for the most part concerned with past outcomes and future outcomes, right? Because you're thinking about, okay, how did I just do, and what does this mean for me going forward? And that's what the thinking mind is always doing, and that's the dialogue that we're listening to, and that's kind of having it's affecting our emotional state, right? And the emotions then, start to work and trying to protect us and are reacting to basically the thoughts that we're having. So hence the need for strategic self-talk, also known as goal-directed self-talk. And that's what the thesis was really about. And
is
that's
that, sorry to interrupt you, but is that to counterbalance the organic self-talk
it's basically to take control of that organic self-talk that's always happening
Mm,
and bringing kind of a sense of direction to it. And the lead kind of researchers in the field of self-talk, they have this beautiful line that they say, goal-directed self-talk brings the power of language to self-regulation. And that's where it brings back to self-regulation. So, and they talk about it, for example, whatever sport you're playing, or even if you're working in the corporate field and you have some type of coach or mentor, right? Like you don't just allow anybody to kind of give you information and you're going to take it and go with it. Yet with our self-talk, we never really check it to say, what is it really telling us? Why am I accepting that? Why am I hanging on to that? And it's like I said, it's a reflection of the thoughts that we're having. And our thoughts are not always rational or controlled. They're often driven by emotion. So especially organic self-talk, that's a reflection of, like I say, there's a relational meaning to kind of past and future. It's charged with emotion, so it's highly irrational. So strategic self-talking and purposeful goal-directed self-talk brings that power of language. So now you're basically coaching yourself, and you're managing your affective state, and you're using your self-talk to serve you in many performance ways, like performance functions, but also goals. And that's how it can become very powerful. And I use keywords. So it can be phrases, they can be pre-planned, or it can literally just be like stopping, in a more controlled sense, recognizing the thoughts that you're having in this internal dialogue that's not serving you and it's highly dysfunctional, and just kind of interrupting that, accepting that, you're not in a great feeling state or whatever situation you're in, but then choosing the words of how you're going to speak to yourself and direct your focus to the situation that you're confronting.
what I've heard a lot of recently, and it kind of parallels a lot with that, is that when we think of someone that is in distress, or when we think of one of our closest friends or our partner, a spouse, a family member, or just someone within our circle that is so close, they are in a distraught situation, whether it's a hug or it's words of support to them or it's an action that they love, the support we give to those people almost unconditionally is paradoxically almost the support that almost none of us give to ourselves.
True.
And I think a lot of what you're leaning on from the psychological and scientific lens is that that dialogue, although it's unconscious, we also struggle, in my opinion, like how do we recognize it before the pause, before the tactics, right? How do we just learn to recognize that organic self-talk that's potentially not just unhinged in the sense of it's always a continuous dialogue, as you say, but it also, if we're moving toward a state of more negative biases from threats or traumas that are perceived in our lives, they're perpetuating in that direction. It's building a snowball. So, how does someone recognize, obviously, the tactics of pausing? I love that. But how do we recognize before we jump into the tactics of
Yeah.
dealing with it and almost dysregulating that organic self talk in a great way?
First of all, you're definitely not an amateur because you're referring to many psychological processes and constructs in what you just said. And it reminded me of a few things that we've been discussing throughout this conversation that I'd like to tie back to. But just as you were explaining it, 20 minutes ago or so, when we were talking about, the challenging year I had last year, you talked about why does it always have to be this like fall off a cliff moment that like needed to happen, right? And now you're saying, how can you recognize this kind of the help that you need in terms of self-regulating before you experience something like that, like falling off a cliff in a metaphorical sense, just as you would help, a family member, a close friend, a loved one, right? And give them the support that they need. How do you give yourself the support that you need, right? And that's and yeah, self-talk is essential in that. And I would say back to what you were saying in terms of the label of it, and why self-regulation is maybe better. It's, I would say, listening to the self-talk that's happening, like hearing your thoughts that you're having in this kind of internal dialogue that you're having, and recognizing, what is it saying? Because a lot of your thoughts are going to be a reflection of your behavior and kind of the situation that you find yourself in. I'm just talking very generally now, but if you're continuously negative and kind of, seeking out kind of things to confirm, the thoughts that you are perceiving as your reality, you're going to find what you're looking for. You're going to find more kind of negative things to reinforce that. Whereas if you have a more positive outlook and a positive approach to a situation, you're going to see only the positive things, right? So like on both sides, you said there's like a cognitive bias, right? And a recency bias towards those things. So how do you interrupt it before it starts to happen is really just listening to it and understanding that your thoughts are not a reflection of your reality. It's a reflection of the perception that you're having of your reality. So reframing and recapturing perspective and your perception is essential. That's another form of self-regulation. And self-talk, just like journaling that we talked about, what brings me to write in my journal is a form of self-regulation. It's a form of recapturing perspective and doing it in a written way where I'm bringing out the thoughts that I'm having and bringing order and structure to it. So now to function more effectively and efficiently as a high performer in the moment, whether you're speaking on a stage or delivering a presentation or performing in an arena, you don't have time to take out your journal and recapture perspective and then deliver the message that you want to deliver, whether it be in a physical sense or a spoken sense, right? So that's where the self-talk, just like how we're having this conversation now, before you say something, there's a little bit of a thought, a little bit of an intention that you're following. That is, goal directed and strategic self-talk in terms of being clear on an intent of this is what I want to do, this is how I want to approach a situation, this is kind of what I want to happen, and then directing your thoughts and behaviors in line with that. And the speaking, the self-talk, right? The self-regulation is what drives the behaviors. So from an athletic sense, in my thesis as working with these sports psychology theories, using these predetermined cue words, there's ample evidence that shows that these self-talk cue words can have goal-directed kind of this is what I was saying, that I might stumble over some of the terminology, but
I have one for you actually. I think
go
that you've
ahead.
written about, which is a challenge versus a threat.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
is that one of them or an
That's
example of
that's
it?
another way of recapturing perspective. But just in terms of self-talk, I meant goal-directed behavior
Yeah,
can be driven by goal-directed self-talk. So like
right.
keywords that can help task execution. That was the word I was looking for. In my thesis, which was on passing, right? Like footballers passing effectively
Hmm.
and using self-talk to enhance their passing abilities. If they want to pass effectively, they're using self-talk that's going to help them pass more effectively, right?
And what were some of
So
those examples?
as keywords. For example, in terms of passing, it's the one that I always use is hitting the center of the ball. It's something we're taught, from a young age when you're being taught how to pass, and
Hmm.
it becomes an automatic process that when you're in a flow state, it's happening automatically. But when the emotions of a situation take you out of a flow state, right? And then you start to, rather than you're kind of your actions are either happening automatically or you're slightly monitoring them, and if you're slightly monitoring them, it's still working in a functional capacity. But the minute that you start to try and control your actions, and if you think of golf and you're kind of overly trying to control your swing and how you hit the ball, that's normally when you lose it and it becomes a dysfunctional performance state. So how do you get out of that? You focus on these action components. So just like golf, hitting a soccer ball, same thing. You hit the middle of the ball, right? You focus on your planted foot. Then another keyword can be sticking the pass along the surface or punching it in, like different just phrases that you can say to yourself before the pass that help you execute the task at the top end of your abilities.
What do you think for people that are in a state of lack or inability to see abundance? They see a lot of negativity in their lives. What do you think are some general keywords we would actually be able to use to action ourselves into a better state?
Nice. That's a great application. That's a great application to a sports psychology theory to everyday life, right? And like you said, everyday performers. So good question. I like the application of it. So one component you were talking about challenge versus threat, which I did want to touch on. I mentioned flow state. So this multi-states theory, right? The must construct accounts for the multiple performance states that athletes experience as part of their subjective experience, right? And the subjective experience incorporates they call it a psychobiosocial state. So there's a psychological aspect, there's a biological aspect in terms of performance and physical capacity. And then there's a social aspect of it as well. That
Right.
all needs to be understood in terms of an individual's subjective experience. So if somebody's experiencing lack of abundance or just negativity, you have to think of that's their subjective experience of their everyday life. That's the state that they're in. So what are the psychological components that are driving that? What are the physiological components, right? The biological side that is having an effect on that negativity? And what are the social aspects of it?
Mm.
So in terms of just throwing out a keyword, it seems like an easy fix, and that's where the work of a sports psychologist is so refined in terms of finding these specific kind of constructs, right, or keywords or phrases that hold power and meaning that can alter somebody's state and put them into a better kind of performance realm. But really, if you unpack it, all those components need to be considered, right? So if somebody's experiencing lack of abundance and negativity, those are very much driven psychologically, but maybe it's easier to start with the physiological side, with the biological side. Are they sleeping well? Are they eating well? Are they moving well? Making sure that, for example, if you're exercising, naturally you're going to there's emotions and hormones that are being produced that are going to naturally make you feel better. So now your feeling state is going to be better, and then that spills over to the psychological side, and then you're starting to think a little bit better about yourself, and which generate kind of more positive thoughts about the environment that you're in, and that kind of has a snowballing effect. And then especially if the social component is also being addressed in terms of, do you have relatableness with colleagues, with friends, with family members, with loved ones? Are those relationships going well? Then all of that forms one subjective experience in their well-being, and they feel good. They're thriving. And this concept of thriving is not something that's in the thesis, but something I was reading about just this week, actually. And I love it because thriving in sports, you think about it, somebody who's just performing well, but really what that entails is performing well, and that performance is maximized and well-being is maximized. It's both of them. So this was in terms of the coach athlete relationship, and kind of how a coach can help their athlete thrive. And it's not just helping them to perform at their best, but it's also helping them to live at their best as well. And that's where all these things need to be incorporated. And again, hence highlighting the need for high performance coaches and sports psychologists, because these are specialized individuals who have an understanding of all these components and can work from the inside out, where they give such an effective and efficient solution to something, but it is really well thought out and constructed, that somebody like the coach or the manager of a company, or a leader of an organization, they don't have the time and capacity to kind of think about all those things on top of all the other demands that they have. And that's why these type of roles are so important and essential in teams, companies, and organizations.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, and it even in the realm of specific keywords, what I'm hearing you say is that it's, of course, it's a subjective experience to the individual, but the strategies, the baseline strategies that a lot of us can use are pausing, listening, understanding the dialogue that is going on, whether that's you doing the work yourself or with someone else, and a qualified professional, of course. And you're hovering around something else, especially in the sports realm, but this applies to life too. And it's a concept of letting go and vulnerability. So, especially elite performers, whether you're a elite performer of life, whether you're an athlete, a business person, a parent, or anything of that degree and beyond, there's a big societal learning, and something that I certainly experienced when I was growing up, which was you just got to always give it your best. You always got to give it your best. You always got to give it your best. And while I do think some of that is true, some of that narrative has also potentially catalyzed the inability to be vulnerable, especially in the athletic realm. And so I'm curious what you're like when we think of how do I be the best, especially in forms of competition, whether that's in sports or otherwise, we strive for consistency, dedication, perfectionism, and that's where the identity attachment kind of perpetuates as well. But how important is it for us to be able to let off the reins, let go, and experience vulnerability for those perfectionism moments of life, let alone just high performance athletes?
It's so essential. And again, like we're taught in the training for psychology to be very careful with the labels that you put on, and it's part of the reason why it's taking so long for this field to really be a staple in these environments that we've been discussing. And often it's because of these labels. If you walk into a sports organization, let's say an NHL team, and you walk in and you say, look, I can help your players be more vulnerable and increase their well-being by doing that, and let go of things, let go of the kind of the expectations that are on them, and allow them to kind of embrace, imperfection and all these things that are so essential for, like you say, high-performing individuals in all walks of life, and again, thriving, not just in the performance realm, but also in the living realm, the well-being. They're gonna say, get the F out of the building. Don't touch our guys, So that's why you have to be very careful with the labels that you use. But vulnerability is an absolute essential component to the performance process. There's no way, I was using different terminology for it, right? I said about when you're in a flow state. You brought up the challenge versus threat. I can tie that back to it. But another part of the multi-states theory is kind of these multiple performance states, but there's four that it's really built off of, right? And one is a flow state where things are happening automatically. We all know this. It's It's the optimal experience, it's the optimal performance, and you know, you're not even really aware that it's happening. It's just happening, right? And then there's another one that's a more effortful approach to high performance. It's another functional performance state, but you could be in an unpleasant affective state while you're having it. So you can be anxious and nervous about your performance. And I think of public speakers, if you listen to a TED Talk, some of the best TED Talks, you can hear in their voice how nervous they are. But that doesn't affect the message that they're delivering. So they're not having a pleasant experience. They're standing on stage trembling a little bit, you know, and they're aware of it because they can hear their voice, but they're focused on the message that they're delivering, and it's more effortful, and they're making it happen. And that's what's referred to as a clutch performance state. And you often hear that in basketball a lot. And basically, flow is categorized as a state that you're just kind of letting it happen and the performance unfolds. And a clutch performance state is where you're going and you're making it happen. So before you can let it happen, you got to make it happen, right? And then another performance state that's well known in sports is choking. And again, you can think of the public speaker that stumbles on their words or freezes. You can think of the athlete that has experienced choking. It's a very, you know, it's a something you never want to experience, but I think everybody's experienced it at different points and in different forms. And that's an unpleasant affective state and a dysfunctional performance state. So that's the third category. And then the fourth category is more of a complacent performance state where you're having a pleasant emotional experience. Like you're not feeling anxious, you're not feeling nervous, but you're completely off it and you're not performing well. And that's mainly because you misappraised the demands of the task, and you weren't prepared. Like the body, physically, you're not prepared, mentally, emotionally, you're not prepared, and you don't feel terrible, but you're performing terribly in a way. And then the must theory has kind of a stepwise process where you can maneuver between those performance states and feeling states, and try and stay in those kind of two performance states that are functional in terms of a clutch performance state and a
The
flow
flow
state.
state.
They refer to it as type 1 performance and type 2 performance. Okay. So in order for those functional performance states to happen, I refer to there's the interaction, right, of your affective state, your valence, the hedonic tone, is it pleasant or unpleasant emotional experience? And then the perceived impact on performance, is it going to be functional or dysfunctional? And then the other component, the third, you know, the third interaction is the degree of action monitoring or control, right? And as I explained before, to be in the two type 1 and type 2 functional performance states, there needs to be, it either needs to be zero action monitoring is happening automatically in a flow state, or there's a slight degree of action monitoring that is allowing you to still perform functionally. And that's where you're using the cue words. Like that's where you're using self-regulation. So you're not like fully just focused on hitting the middle of the ball, but when you go to make a pass, you're aware of hitting the middle of the ball, and that's what's helping you to do it effectively. Okay. But if you're in a dysfunctional performance state, so let's say type 3, if you're choking, and let's say in golf, it happens all the time, right? You see somebody, they're choking, they're missing their putts left and right. It's just not happening for them. That's because they're trying to control their actions too much. And the minute that sets in, you're holding your putter with too tight of a grip. You're rigid, your shoulders are locked up, you're not loose, your heart is beating, you know, so you're trying to control your actions too much, right? And that's where the letting go needs to happen. So if you don't let go,
Uh,
yeah, it's mixed in there, it's disguised. If you don't let go, you're trying to control, you're going to be in a dysfunctional performance state. You can still get some positive outcomes, but you're not going to enjoy yourself. It's going to be a very unpleasant experience, and you're likely not going to perform well because you're too rigid and controlling in your actions. There's no flow, there's no automaticity that needs to happen for you to perform effectively. If you're swinging your driver, you need to let go and you need to have your intent of where you want to put it, right? You might use some self-talk cues in terms of where you're trying to hit it and what you're trying to do, but then you need to let go and let it happen. And now I'm contradicting myself because I was referring to a clutch state as making it happen. But in order for both of those, there needs to be this letting go. And it's actually in the theory, right? And it's a psychological theory called mindfulness and acceptance and commitment. Okay. So you mindfully accept the situation, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm going for an action and I hope it's going to go well, but it might go bad, but I can't control it. So I'm accepting whatever can happen, but I'm going to commit to this intent, or that theory uses values. So this can tie back to identity. For example, if I want to be a courageous, let's keep it at public speaking. if one of your values is courage, right? Then you're going to stand up on the stage, you're going to have the courage, you're going to let go of however your message is going to be perceived. You can't control that, right? And you're mindfully aware of it, but you're going to commit to your value of courage and delivering the message that you want to deliver. And if it means something to them, great. And if it doesn't, well, oh well. And that's where you let go of the outcome. In a sports setting, it's that confident vulnerability. For me to stand in the goal and there's a shot from a player, I don't know where they're going to shoot. I'm not in control of that. I can pick up on some cues, but the ball can go in, it can go over the net, or I can save it. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm trying to save it. I'm ready to save it, but I need to let go, stare down, the shot, have my hands up, and be externally focused and react to the shot that's there and do my best to finish the save or secure the ball, right? So there's a confident vulnerability that comes from letting go, and it's an essential part of the performance process.
Yeah, so many parallels to life in general there too. I mean, it's interesting because it's almost a unique intersection of where psychology meets stoicism as well at the
Yes.
same time. If you think of Marcus Aurelius and his works on essentially saying one of the most important things that humans can do is learn to understand and recognize what's in their control and what's out of their control.
Yes.
And we can't do that until we're vulnerable. We can't do that until we're true with ourselves. We can't do that until we let go to some degree, let off the reins, or else we're clutching the grip too hard
You're
on
controlling.
everything. Yeah.
Exactly. You're trying to
Um,
control things. Yeah.
yeah.
You
And
got to surrender control. That's another word that in sports many athletes don't like to surrender. It seems passive. Letting go seems passive. But like my mentor Mark says, you let go so you can go faster, right? In terms of if you think of a race car driver, they've got to take their foot off the brake in order to go faster. So they've got to let go of that certainty, of that security, of that control, and just let the engine go.
that's so amazing. So a couple final questions, John, that I have for you. But first, I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you for sharing what you are doing and what you're studying academically, professionally, and otherwise. Thank you for who you are. You've had an incredible career. You and a career of life, frankly, too. We've known each other for quite a while, and it's always interesting how relationships like this come full circle in the way they
Definitely.
do. So I want to acknowledge you for what you're doing from a sense of not just the academic, but who you are as a person and what you're putting out onto the world. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Couple final questions. First one, wisdom bites. So hypothetical situation, we've talked about a lot of different things today. So you don't have to bias it. We were talking about recency bias too. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be about that, okay? But wisdom bites. Imagine that you could accumulate all the wisdom and understand it, conceptualize it, and it was right in front of you on the wall. The wisdom from the time you were a child dreaming about football and becoming a professional
Yeah.
football star and coherent to the times of today and everything in between. And now just imagine all that wisdom is gone. You're starting anew. But from this point forward, the rest of your life, you could only live by 2 or 3 wisdom bites, pieces of wisdom that you had to go forward with. John, what would your 2 or 3 wisdom bites be?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, that we just were talking not about the recency bias, but just about Stoic philosophy, and that's a philosophy that really resonates with me. And again, my kind of this concept that I live by, that it's not a Disney movie. That's something that if I can start over and go forward with, I would have that understanding from the beginning, and not in such a pessimistic manner, but just in terms of understanding that, like we were just saying, there's so little that we actually control, and in terms of the outcomes going exactly how we want them to go and trying to control that instead actually just letting it go and letting it happen. And that's how you experience, this optimal experience of flow. So I would say it's like we just said, having a clear intent and understanding of who you are, your identity, which we touched on in the beginning, and we didn't really come back to it, but it's such an important component to living a purposeful and meaningful life, is understanding who you are, and then having an intent in terms of a pursuit of what you're trying to do, a dream, and going after it. and then completely, letting go of what kind of is going to happen along that journey and just living it fully, and doing your best in every situation that you confront to apply your intent and live by your identity, and do the best you can, and continue to kind of progress forward and take in the fullness and the richness of the experience.
It's beautiful, man. That was a perfect summary of basically what the conversation was
Yeah.
about, almost, right? In an amazing way.
Yeah, you
So,
brought that out of me. You're a good you're a very good host, and you ask great questions.
oh, thank you, thank you.
That when you called me about this discussion, like this having this conversation, you said it was going to be exactly that, and what a great conversation. The time has passed, and we can easily keep it going. And
Hmm.
yeah, this doesn't even have to be recorded. It would have been a great discussion. Yeah,
Yeah, hey, this isn't the end, regardless of
absolutely.
when the recording stops, John. So I
For
appreciate
sure.
you. Final question. So it's called the three R's. So in the spirit of this podcast, the Reflect On podcast, it is the three reflection questions. Okay. If you need to pause, that's okay. But I want you to try and think of it in a shortish answer if you can. Doesn't have to be one sentence necessarily, but three sort of quick shot questions for you. Okay. The first R of the three R's is, what have you been reflecting on the most recently?
The kind of the life going forward in terms of I'm at the point where I'm reaching kind of the end of one pursuit, as we were just talking about, my pursuit as a professional soccer player, and this dream that I've had, and now kind of the beginning of a new pursuit in terms of what I want to do next as a sports psychologist, and just really reflecting a lot in terms of how to get that going, and to kind of answer this calling that I feel like I have inside to do this, and do this at a really high level. And yeah, it's not easy. It's kind of a little bit of an awkward, uncomfortable period in terms of lots of uncertainty, and I've invested a lot of time and effort into getting this education and doing the master's, and I have all this experience in the practical field, and how do I actually start to tie this all together and start working with individual clients and organizations and teams, etc. There's not a clear path to it. For some reason, I like choosing these pursuits with lots of uncertainty, and I always kind of relate to the life of an artist, and I feel like I have this artistic calling in me in terms of confronting situations and endeavors of uncertainty. But in terms of actual art, maybe writing is the only thing that I actually have that's artistic. So yeah, that's what I've been reflecting a lot on. And also, in terms of now being back in Canada with my wife, and we want to settle and start a family and these type of things. So lots of thought and reflection in that direction. And it's interesting. It's exciting to look at, and to just, yeah, as you said, reflect on.
So that was a great answer, except we went the whole conversation without saying soccer almost, and you said soccer in that answer. So I'm a little
Yeah.
disappointed.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Reflection number two, R2. What is the one thing you think you're not reflecting on enough?
Oof, I got the mind runs pretty wild. I think a lot. That's probably when you're getting interviewed for a job, they always ask you what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. For me, it's they normally it's the same thing that ties it's a double-edged sword. For
Hmm.
me, it's a thinking mind. I'm a very analytical, thoughtful individual. So for how kind of resourceful that can be, it could also be very unresourceful in time. So it's not much I'm reflecting. I'm trying to think of what am I not reflecting a lot on. That's you got me with that question.
That's okay. Maybe I'll challenge you, and you, in the spirit of your own theories, letting go to the over
Yeah.
analytical stage. I'm guilty of that too. And that's something that, until someone brings it to my mind and lets me know that I'm overthinking something, because that is a state, I believe, of over analytical. Get back to me on the question,
What
if
about
you can
you?
answer.
I'm curious. Now you got me curious. What's something that
Mm.
you haven't been reflecting on recently that you think should be?
I've never been put it back on me. I got to roll up my sleeves
Flipping
here.
the R back at you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question back. I don't think I'm reflecting on enough, and this isn't just because we're on air here or anything, but I don't think I'm reflecting on enough the beauty of the freedom and pursuance that I'm able to do with this podcast
Yeah.
and this form of art. You mentioned the word art. I do reflect on it, but I don't think I have been doing it enough because it's interesting. When I interact, you talked about identity formation. When I interact with people who see what's going on social media or anything else, and I haven't seen in a little bit, one of the first questions they ask is, "Hey, how's the podcast going?"
Yeah.
And I'll try to give them an honest answer, but not one that takes as long as one of these conversations, of course. But then sometimes I catch myself thinking about, okay, who's the next, and I just made a post about this, but who's the next, famous person, or how do I get likes and views? And I'm really not one to get entrenched in that. I don't think too much, but I would be naive to say that it's not pulling me a little bit. So
Mhm.
my reflection, I think I need to come back to more is center myself on the true purpose of why I'm doing this, because that helps me also recenter myself for life and a general gratitude of life. There's tons of stories and learnings that I've already had with this, and there's tons of reminders out there that it could be a lot worse. So just the
Yeah.
freedom of being able to do something like this is just beautiful, and I don't think I'm
That's
reflecting
a
on
great
enough.
answer. Yeah,
Um,
no, that's a great answer. As soon as you said it, I would say, yeah, same here.
yeah,
In
yeah,
terms of reflecting on how fortunate we are to have the opportunities that we have in terms, and then really are we maximizing it to the full potential and kind of questioning some of the thoughts and the reflections that we're spending most time on, and are those the ones that are really serving, our true kind of desires of what we're trying to attain out of these experiences. So
yeah.
I would say the same. So thanks for guiding. That was a great answer.
So final question, R3, John. Final question is, we've talked about what you've been reflecting on the most, what you haven't been reflecting on enough, or both of us haven't been reflecting on enough. The final R is, what do you think is the one thing we could all reflect on more together to move us forward as a society?
I think right now, one of the things that's been kind of bother me a lot, and I'm the oldest player in my team. First time that's been the case, so I'm dealing with a different generation of players and teammates, that there has to be, again, we're all in the same field, we share the change room, we're fighting for the same goal, so there's got to be this relatableness too. But one of the things that I see in them, that's spilling over to my generation, myself included, and older people in general, is just, like you said, the amount of kind of distractions there are in terms of things to capture your attention, social media being one. I see a lot of now in sports, which I think is becoming a big problem, a lot of gambling, and because of this being legalized in Canada, people, in online casinos and gambling on sports and all that, in terms of all these kind of vices that can capture your attention and time, and reflecting on, how is this serving us? How is this serving me? How is this serving us? How is this making kind of, how is spending time conversing on this, making the most of the time we have with these people, and helping these, each other to kind of be the best we can be. I think that should merit some reflection, because I feel like a lot of time and energy and attention is spent on very on-resourceful things that aren't doing much for you, and in a way can be maybe having a reverse effect on you. And I think we should be reflecting more on how we can, like I said, maximize not just performance, achievement, these type of things, but also well-being, and really maximizing the social aspect of that, which is so important. So when you are in your social circles, kind of reflecting on what are we actually discussing. And I always think I love podcasts, and this conversation has been incredible. It's been a great afternoon, discussing these ideas with you, and having this, discussing these topics. Why can't we go to a bar and have some beers or drinks with some friends and get into these type of meaningful conversations, right? They normally kind of sit at the surface, and these are the things that we should be reflecting more on, in terms of how can we go a little bit deeper in terms of challenging ourselves with these type of questions that cause us to kind of go in and think, and bring out ideas that can be shared, and that can lead to other thoughts that have an effect on what we're trying to do and the kind of the opportunities we have to best serve the world. And you talked about stoicism, and one of my favorite stoic bits I should have included in that question that you asked me in terms of the wisdom bits is, we have two main purposes on this earth. One is to find what we're really good at and what we're meant to do, and serve the world in the best way that we can with that. And the other is to be a good person. So those two coinciding with each other, I think in terms of the social aspect and the people that you associate with and the discussions that you have, there should be kind of a shared support system for each other and kind of helping to lift and to motivate and to encourage each individual, including yourself, to kind of maximize the fullness of who you are and how you're best serving the world, and also being a good person for the community and for the environment that you live in.
It's so powerful, John. Thank you so much, Jonathan Viscosi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for the discussion. That was fun. It was great. And like I said, there's so much more that we could touch on, but you asked some great questions and you were a man of your word. This was a really inspiring and energizing conversation, and you sparked some good thoughts that I'll come off with and continue to reflect on, and looking forward to keeping the conversation going.
Thank you very much for spending time with me on the Reflect On podcast today. If you found this episode enjoyable or inspiring, please share it with those who it may help and leave a positive review so that we can grow together. Until next time, reflect onward and keep moving forward.